If you've been shopping for a used sailboat lately, you've probably noticed something strange, because the prices don't make any sense. A 1985 sailboat selling for $80,000, while a 2005 model from a well-known brand struggles to find a buyer at $55,000. Used boats costing more than brand new ones. Sellers asking nearly $500,000 for boats that eventually sell for $335,000. This video will explain exactly why the used sailboat market has become one of the most confusing and counterintuitive markets in America. And by the end, you'll understand which boats are actually worth the money and where the real opportunities are hiding if you know where to look. Understanding today's sailboat market requires going back to 2020, because that's when everything went sideways. When the pandemic hit, people who had never thought about boat ownership suddenly wanted boats, and they wanted them badly. Travel was canceled and vacations were off the table, but a boat meant freedom. You could get aboard, socially distanced from everybody else, and go wherever you wanted, and that's how industry executives described the appeal at the time. The numbers tell the story clearly. New powerboat sales hit a 13-year high in 2020 at 320,000 units, which was up 12% from 2019. Pre-owned boat sales exceeded 1 million units for the first time since 2006, and here's what really matters for understanding today's market. First-time buyers made up 37% of those used boat purchases. For the first time in a decade, buyers under 40 outnumbered buyers over 60. This wasn't just a bump in sales. Entry-level aluminum boat packages averaging just $35,200 meant boat ownership suddenly seemed achievable for people who'd never considered it before. And that's when supply started falling apart. Brunswick shut down production. Yamaha paused operations. Group Beneteau stopped building boats. Supply chain problems hit fiberglass, resin, and outboard engines, with some dealers reporting 2 to 3 year waiting lists for new boats. One dealer described having 5 Key West boats sitting there without the Yamahas that should go on them, and another Ohio dealer who normally kept 30 boats in inventory found himself down to just 2. Used boat inventory, in the words of industry observers, virtually disappeared. Michael C. Galati of Galati Yacht Sales put it this way: by end of 2020, all of the inventory that was desirable was sold. Brokerage and new boats, anything late model or new that was priced competitively, all of those boats were sold. Dealers went from being salespeople to order takers, and prices started climbing. Prices went up, and that part makes sense as basic supply and demand. Between 2019 and 2022, new boat prices increased 44%, while used boats rose 28%. By 2021, total industry expenditures reached $56.7 billion, up from $42 billion just 2 years earlier. Individual boats saw average increases of 10% in 2022 alone, with another 2 to 5% in 2023. And here's where it gets interesting. By 2024, interest rates had risen significantly and sales volume dropped to 858,798 pre-owned boats, down from over 1 million at peak. Classic conditions for a buyer's market, right? More boats available, fewer buyers, higher financing costs, prices should come down. But that's not what happened. During the first half of 2024, used boat average prices actually increased 4.2%, while new boat prices declined 3.4%. The average used boat now sits at $211,500, which is higher than the $174,000 average for new boats. Josh McLean, president of David Walters Yachts in Annapolis, explains the psychology behind this. Anybody who bought a boat in the craze of 2020 to 2022, if they're coming back now to sell, they're people who bought their boat at a premium, at the peak of the market. They're not going to see those same numbers that they saw a year or two ago. People who bought high don't want to sell low, and they'd rather sit on their boats than admit the market has moved. Current data shows this standoff clearly. Sailboats 40 feet and over with asking prices above $200,000 have a median asking price of $439,000, but the median sold price comes in at $335,000. That 7.26% discount from asking is up 11% from last year, and time on market is stretched to between 159 and 172 days. Courtney Chalmers of Boats Group summarized the standoff simply. Somebody is going to have to come down on the price of the used boats. Now, let's talk about something that confuses almost everyone who enters this market. Why does a 1985 sailboat often cost more than a 2005 model? A well-maintained 1985 Tiana 37 routinely sells for $60,000 to $80,000, while a neglected 2005 Hunter 36 might struggle to find a buyer at $45,000 to $55,000. Newer should be worth more, but that's not how sailboats work, and understanding why will save you a lot of money. Bob Perry designed the Tiana 37 in 1975, and it was built to semi-custom standards with thick hand-laid fiberglass, solid teak interiors, bronze hardware, and systems designed for circumnavigations. These boats were built to cross oceans. Hunter and Catalina took a different approach entirely, and yacht designer Chuck Payne calls them the Fords and Chevys of sailing, meaning reliable but built for volume at minimum cost. Payne's analysis explains so much about this market. The few fiberglass yachts that were built in low volume, custom production to exceptionally high standards, retain good value if properly maintained. These are the Morris yachts, Hinckleys, Aldens, Cambrias. These yachts cost, when built, at least triple the cost of a Morgan Catalina or Irwin. But the payback is that today they have retained 10 times the value of the high-volume nautical white goods. 10 times the value. That's not a typo. This creates some remarkable price situations. A 30-year-old Francis 26 sells for $30,000 to $70,000 used, while a new one would cost $550,000. Hinkley boats range from $57,000 to nearly $3 million, with vintage models commanding serious money. Payne notes that when one of his designs pops up today, it is immediately bought at higher prices than 2020. And here's the other side of that equation. Mass production boats from the 1970s and 80s boom era have hit a wall. Payne puts it bluntly. Most used sailboats today are worth what the lead is worth, minus the cost of separating it from the hull. Millions of fiberglass boats now sell for scrap value, or less than scrap value, because they actually cost money to dispose of. The 30 to 40-foot range should be the sweet spot of the market. These boats are big enough for coastal cruising and weekends aboard, but small enough for a couple to handle, which sounds ideal. Instead, this segment has become the market's most complicated pricing zone. Boats from 2000 to 2004 often listed inflated prices despite original rigging, 20-year-old electronics, and engines approaching major service intervals, and sellers don't account for accumulated deferred maintenance. Well-built classics from the 1980s like the Valiant 40, Tiana 37, and Shannon 38 fall through pricing cracks because they're too old for bank financing but too capable to abandon. That financing issue deserves attention. Banks are reluctant to finance boats over 15 years old, which shrinks the buyer pool and limits potential sales regardless of the boat's actual condition. Traditional wisdom held that 5 to 7 years old represented the value sweet spot, new enough for good condition, but old enough for significant depreciation. COVID disrupted this entirely, and some 5-year-old boats now cost more than their original purchase price. External costs compound the mid-size boat problem further. These vessels require marina slips running $3,000 to over $10,000 per season depending on region, plus complex systems maintenance and surveys for insurance. Industry experts cite the 10% rule, meaning you should budget 10% of boat value annually for maintenance, mooring, insurance, and operations. A $150,000 boat means $15,000 a year in carrying costs before you raise a sail. Here's something most boat shoppers don't realize. The same exact boat can cost 30% more depending on where you find it. A 2004 Catalina 310 sells for $94,000 to $101,000 in the Great Lakes, but that same boat goes for $64,000 to $66,000 in Florida. Same model, same condition range, $30,000 difference. Florida consistently offers 10 to 20% lower prices for several reasons. They have the largest inventory in the country, which creates competition among sellers. Premium marina costs push owners to sell. Sun damage degrades gel coat and canvas faster. Ex-charter boats are abundant, and there's what one broker called snow goose sellers, which describes northerners who bought the sailing dream only to discover they don't enjoy passage making. With $6.3 billion in boat sales in 2022, Florida's volume creates real buyer leverage. Great Lakes boats command premiums of 20 to 30% over Florida, despite being freshwater vessels with winters stored out of water, conditions that actually preserve boats better than year-round saltwater exposure. Limited inventory and local brand followings create seller advantage there. California adds its own premium of 10 to 20%, plus a unique burden in the form of 1% annual property tax on boat value. One industry observer noted that buying new in California makes no sense given the tax burden on depreciating assets. Smart buyers exploit these gaps. One Chicago buyer described driving to West Palm Beach for a boat probably 30% cheaper in Florida than identical Great Lakes inventory. Even with transport costs, regional arbitrage can save tens of thousands of dollars. Some people look at the current market and wonder if we're headed for a crash like 2008. The financial crisis devastated the boat market back then. Superyacht new orders collapsed 53% in just 12 months. Brokerage prices were slashed by more than half, and recovery took approximately 7 to 8 years. But here's what made 2008 different. Massive dealer inventory existed at the time, and banks called in floor plan loans, which forced fire sales. Dealers went bankrupt and liquidated below wholesale. Manufacturers took back boats and dumped inventory. The correction was violent and fast. Today's market has the opposite problem. Dealers have been on manufacturer allocation for over 2 years, and there's no inventory glut to force fire sales. InfoLink Managing Director Jack Ellis stated in 2023, "Prices for new and used boats will not be returning to 2019 levels anytime soon." Instead of collapse, the market faces slow normalization. Boats take longer to sell and discounts creep upward, but the floor remains elevated because there's no forced selling pressure. Sailboats depreciate differently than nearly everything else you can buy. After 3 years, sailboats and yachts retain approximately 90% of value compared to 70 to 75% for powerboats. One Beneteau sailboat retained 73% of value after 10 years, holding $400,000 from an original $550,000. Standard depreciation follows a predictable curve with 10 to 15% loss in year 1, about 25 to 34% over the first 3 years, then stabilizing around 40 to 50% by year 10. Premium brands transcend these curves entirely. Hallberg Rossi, Nauter's Swan, Hinckley, Pacific Seacraft, and Oyster Yachts maintain value regardless of age. Classic boats can actually appreciate, with Chris Craft and Riva increasing approximately 5% per year over 2 decades. A 40-year-old Swan commanding 6 figures seems irrational until you understand it was built to standards no production builder matches today. This creates difficulties for sellers of production boats. A 1980s Hunter or Catalina might be worth less than its lead keel, because disposal costs exceed market value, while the seller next slipover asks 6 figures for a vessel from the same era because it says Hinckley on the transom. Both prices can be perfectly rational. Certain sailboat categories have become nearly unsellable. Mass production classic plastic from the 1970s and 80s boom now numbers in the millions of hulls, with many worth scrap value or less. Fiberglass doesn't decompose, and disposal costs range from over $1,000 for dinghies to over $20,000 for larger vessels. One Rhode Island program now shreds boats for cement kiln fuel. Motor sailors suffer from being good at neither motoring nor sailing. Racing boats without active 1 design classes have no built-in market. Oddball designs with non-standard layouts or unusual rigs languish while conventional boats sell. Boats with teak deck problems face core rot repairs costing over $10,000, and large boats over 45 feet scare buyers because of ongoing slip costs and crew requirements in an era of rising marina fees. Virginia estimates over 200 abandoned vessels sit in state waters. One organization removed 70 boats and 675,000 pounds of debris in 2024 alone. One broker put it this way: "An old car has scrap value of a few $100s, but old fiberglass boats, There's usually nothing salvageable, and it costs money to dispose of them. Here's something the industry doesn't like to talk about publicly. 60 years old. That's the median age of current boat owners. More boat owners are in their 70s than in their 40s, and many who owned boats 25 years ago are the same people who own boats today, just 25 years older. The COVID-era influx of younger buyers temporarily masked this trend, but first-time buyer surges have moderated from pandemic peaks. The average first-time buyer age remains 46 years, which is not exactly young blood entering the sport. This matters for pricing, because eventual demographic-driven selling pressure seems inevitable. The industry is, in the words of one broker, focused on accessibility and attracting younger boaters through Discover Boating campaigns, precisely because the ownership base is aging out. YouTube sailing channels have become an unexpected demand driver. Victor von Savoyen of Yacht Consultancy. Yacht Match noted that the surge of YouTube channels promoting sailing as an accessible adventure has contributed to market interest. The irony is real. Social media content about affordable sailing dreams may be sustaining prices that make those dreams harder to achieve. After all of this, where should you actually look if you want to buy a sailboat? The clearest opportunities lie in premium-build boats from the 1980s and 90s that have reached the 15 to 25-year mark, boats like Tiana, Valiant, Pacific Seacraft, and Tartan, where build quality compensates for age. These boats were designed for ocean passages and built to last decades. Florida and off-season buying create additional leverage, and that regional arbitrage represents real money in your pocket. The worst value sits in mass production boats over 20 years old, with deferred maintenance, large vessels in expensive marina markets, and anything requiring substantial immediate investment to become seaworthy. The market is slowly favoring buyers with 7% discounts, extended time on market, and negotiating room returning after years of sellers controlling every transaction. But prices won't return to 2019 levels. The floor is reset permanently higher, supported by the absence of forced selling pressure that created 2008-era bargains. The used sailboat market's pricing chaos reflects overlapping disruptions rather than simple irrationality. COVID created demand shock and supply collapse simultaneously. Pandemic-era buyers paid peak prices and resist crystallizing losses. Premium boats defy depreciation, while mass production vessels hit negative values. Regional markets remain fragmented enough to reward patient buyers willing to travel. Sailboat prices make no sense because sailboats aren't consumer products that follow normal depreciation. They're lifestyle assets valued on build quality, maintenance history, and buyer dreams, and those are variables that no pricing model captures cleanly. A 1985 Tiana worth more than a 2005 Hunter isn't irrational. It's a reflection of what 40 years of ocean sailing experience has taught the market about what actually matters in a boat. If you found this breakdown helpful and want to see more videos like this one, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling me what boat you're shopping for or what market you'd like me to break down next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.